A lot of people have recently started saying that the zombie genre is becoming oversaturated, but I actually think, in terms of the past several years, zombie media has died down significantly to where it was 5 or 10 years ago. But with news of another installment in the 28 Days Later franchise, I think that the same level of popularity is bound to return sometime, because 28 Days Later is really what started all of this in the first place. I believe that all the zombie media that we have today, The Walking Dead, The Last of Us, Call of Duty Zombies, zombies on Disney Channel, all of this can really be traced back to 28 Days Later. This film redefined the genre as a whole, and I personally believe it doesn't get nearly enough credit. So I went to go and watch 28 Days Later on Netflix? No, it's not there. Hulu? Nope. Can I rent it on YouTube? No, not there either. Well, maybe I'll just buy it on Blu-ray. Whoa, never mind. Anyways, I somehow found a copy of this movie, and also 28 Weeks Later, but that one's way more accessible. And I've got a lot of thoughts. Thoughts on how these movies influence the current zombie culture, thoughts on how these movies did a lot of things right that we still don't see today, and thoughts that maybe these movies have or haven't aged so gracefully. So sit back, try to relax, and know my video's quality of this movie is not terrible, this is just how it was filmed, and let's talk about the world of 28, insert time frame here, later. At the beginning of the film, I almost had to check and see if this was the right movie, and not the beginning of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Both movies start off with chimp experiments, and in both movies, chimps are the reason why the apocalypse starts in the first place. But we see very plainly how the virus started, and cut to a relatively small time frame later, 28 days, to see the world entirely different. We get to a man in a hospital waking up and then walking the streets to see how different everything is from when he last remembers. We've seen scenes like this so many times before, but I think what makes this one stand out so much is just how empty everything is. There are no people, there's barely any car crashes or any wreckage, just newspapers all around, and our main character Jim getting increasingly paranoid as he walks around the empty streets of London. Right away, you can see how The Walking Dead was influenced by these scenes. And yes, I have that correct, because this movie came out a year before even the comics came out, but even if it didn't, these two scenes are very reminiscent of each other, so I'm sure AMC took a good amount of inspiration from this opening scene of 28 Days Later. He goes into a church and eventually finds people who seem very surprised to see him, but of course these are not people, these are zombies, or the infected, but I'm gonna refer to them by both. So he runs away and into the hands of some survivors. He meets Mark and Selena, and they explain to him what the world is like, the riots, how the government fell, and why he should only travel during the daytime, which isn't a new zombie trope, but it's certainly a rare one, so I like that. One thing this movie is incredibly guilty of is product placement. It's like the Truman Show with how obvious the characters are and the shots are.
Pepsi or Lilt?
Tango.
But I mean, this movie did not have a super high budget, so I get it, take what you can. Our survivors go to Jim's parents' house, where he finds the most heartbreaking sight and letter imaginable, and the other two share similar stories that happened to them 28 days prior. The dialogue in the movie is incredible. This movie was written by Alex Garland. You might know him as the director of Ex Machina, Annihilation, or most recently Civil War. He's recently stated that he wants to go back to just writing movies instead of directing, which kind of sucks because I've liked all of his movies, but is also pretty great because he's a fantastic writer. He does such an excellent job with the exposition and telling the audience everything that they need to know without over-explaining, both in terms of the world and the characters. This is important in every movie, but I think especially important in zombie movies. We want to know what happened to the world and why it turned out like this in less than a month, or the length of February, but also need to meet and care about these characters. Alex Garland's script allows us to do both of these things at the same time, which is riding a very thin line that a lot of other scripts don't do, or at least don't do well. The infected come out for the survivors, and unfortunately, Mark is bitten. Ah, man, this must take some sort of toll on Selena. I mean, they've been traveling together. This is gonna be tough for her. Oh, no, it's not so tough after all. Selena is an excellent character and super easy to root for. She has a line shortly after this to Jim where she's like, what are we gonna do? Find a cure or just fall in love and all the time? And usually, yeah, those are the two options in zombie apocalypse stories. So for her to essentially address the audience here with this line is really funny, really clever, and already sets up 28 Days Later to be entirely different from previous zombie movies. The two of them leave Jim's house and see lights coming from an apartment, so they head there, going up flights of steps and getting followed by the infected, where they are ultimately saved by Mad Eye Moody, who is super friendly, very clearly just happy to have some company, and this is something that we don't see a whole lot of in any sort of zombie apocalypse story. A person that's just genuinely friendly and trying to help everybody who's not infected, keep up appearances for his daughter, etc. Maybe it's because I'm so used to watching American zombie movies, where everybody's just like,
Get out of here! God made this for me! All of you, beat it!
and this is very thoroughly a British film. Not a film set in England, this is a British film. It has that British quality that I can't quite explain, but if you've seen any sort of British media like Skins or House of Anubis, you know what I mean. And I always like watching zombie films that take place in other countries. Obviously, my first thought, as an American, is to go grab your gun when the apocalypse starts. But that's just not a thought in this film, or things like Train to Busan, etc. And it makes things, honestly, a bit more interesting. I mean, when Jim first meets the survivors, their weapon of choice is a Molotov cocktail. We learn that staying at the apartment isn't a possibility, and that there's some soldiers on the radio, so they plan to go and meet them. This is where we possibly get what is the greatest line in the movie, or any zombie movie for that matter.
See, this is a really shit idea. You know why? Because it's really obviously a shit idea.
But it leads to a pretty lighthearted moment, followed by Killian being 100% right. But the scene is so great, and I think it's the best example of what makes this movie so scary. The infected are scary in this film not because of how grotesque they look or because of their enhanced abilities, but because this follows horror movie 101. The less you see of the monster, the scarier it is. There's actually very few times that we get to see what a zombie looks like up close. This film utilizes tension more than action. Our characters are capable of killing, but only as a last resort, and that makes the film and the zombies themselves seem scarier. After this, we get an incredible scene, the scene that's in all apocalypse movies, the shopping montage. Taking whatever you want and being grateful for all the small things that we take advantage of every day, scenes like this just add to the personality of characters, like Frank telling Jim that they can't just take anything, so he makes him put the alcohol back just to reach for the top shelf stuff and take 4 bottles of it. These scenes are always so much fun, and we've all wished that we could just have a supermarket to ourselves, take whatever we want, break whatever we want, etc. The 4 of them continue traveling, stopping to get gas, having a picnic, and overall this whole section of the movie is dedicated to showing us the beauty that still remains in the world even after an apocalypse. Friendship, nature, and enjoying the little things. Selena even tells Jim that she was wrong about surviving being the best thing that can happen to you now. I think this is ultimately the message of the film, that even in the darkest times and darkest days, there's still more to life than just surviving. And this works so well because the dynamic the 4 of these people have is so well written. The actors have such great chemistry together, the dialogue feels natural, and it's easy to root for them and care for them. And this is all great for a while, but this is still a zombie apocalypse movie, so the reality of the situation and the genre kicks in when they get to the checkpoint and the military is gone. This is when we see Frank finally break down, who's been the personification of hope this entire time, and one mistake ultimately leads to his death. It's such a tragic death because it really is just a mistake, but it brings us back to the brutality of this world and the brutality of this infection. The military takes them to a safe house, and all seems well. They get a hot shower, but right from the very beginning, something seems off about this place. We have a shot that lingers on some smirking soldiers. They're playing around in the car, doing donuts, and even though this was the destination they ultimately wanted, it doesn't seem like the place they imagined. Even the doctor himself apologizes for this place not being what he advertised it to be. As Jim takes the tour around the base, more cracks begin to appear. The soldiers seem entirely inadequate. They're keeping an infected person for research, and as the hours pass, the three of them feel more and more like outsiders. Dinner gets interrupted by an attack, so the soldiers go out and handle it, and come back in to taunt Selina. Jim and one of the soldiers sticks up for her, and the Major stops them all. The Major invites Jim in for a drink out of one of the bottles that Frank got for them, and he says that he promised his soldiers a future, and that future meant women. Jim tries to escape with the women, but they ultimately stop him, and the one soldier who stuck up for Selina gets beaten, and the two of them get taken out for execution. Jim ends up escaping after the soldiers get distracted by one another, and with him out free, he now has two choices: leave the girls to an ungodly fate, or try to take on every single soldier at this compound. Now, we haven't really seen Jim do anything that would indicate him being able to go all John Wick on these guys, but we've also seen him and his feelings for Selina increase throughout the film. So of course, Jim comes up with a plan to go back and rescue the others. This whole sequence is fantastic. The whole movie, we've been on the edge of our seats because of the infected running around, but this sequence flips everything because now Jim is the predator lurking in the shadows. It's like Jim is I'm Batman. But when he gets back to the compound, it's dark and rainy. He lets the infected soldier off the chain, and we start rooting for the horror to happen, and we aren't afraid of it. This whole third act is what separates 28 Days Later from not only other zombie movies, but other horror movies in general. We start rooting for Jim's plan, which involves the infected taking out the soldiers. We also get quite possibly the most iconic soundtrack from a zombie movie ever with In a House, in a Heartbeat. There's just so much to love about this entire third act. It's satisfying and terrifying in all the best and unique ways. It even ends with a moment that breaks up the darkness of the whole sequence.
I thought he was biting you.
Kissing her.
The Major gets his proper end, and we end with a great freeze frame cliffhanger. Before we cut ahead, another 28 days later, and the movie looks great now. I waited until now to say this, but the whole reason why this film looks this way is because it was shot digitally. Back in 2002, this was the best they could get everything to look digitally, but this ending scene was shot on actual film, so it can be updated to look better. So that's why so many older films out there, like Star Wars, look great today, because they were shot on film, not digital. But with this film's budget, it was much cheaper to shoot digitally because I'm sure nobody making this thought this movie would ever live on the way that it did. For some reason, I think this is why it's not available to stream anywhere. Maybe there's some sort of new technology to update the visuals on older digital files, and they're still in the process of doing that before re-releasing it. I don't know, sounds fake, but so did AI art like 5 years ago. There is so much to be thankful for when it comes to what 28 Days Later did for the zombie genre. There's evidence strewn throughout all of zombie pop culture that leads back to this movie, and this movie achieves so much in its hour 45 runtime that took like The Walking Dead 3 seasons to accomplish. Yes, it's not the greatest quality, the editing is a bit all over the place, and if you don't like British films, you're not gonna like this one, but I absolutely love this movie, and I still think that the third act is so incredibly unique. So I'm gonna go 9 out of 10. This movie, if you can guess it, actually picks up 6 months after the outbreak. This one was shot on film, has a higher budget, more recognizable actors, because remember, at the time, Cillian Murphy was not Oscar winner Robert Oppenheimer, and this one does lose that sort of British charm that the first film had. This one feels like an American film trying to be a British film, if that makes any sense. The opening sequence shows us a group of survivors who are living pretty comfortably in the apocalypse, and the day that everything falls apart for them. We meet who we assume to be the primary characters of the film until the whole group is attacked in the house after they let a young boy into the home. We see just how quickly everything falls apart and how do-or-die situations sometimes lead you to forget everything and everybody you care about in order to survive yourself. ultimately leading to one survivor escaping. I think this is a great sequence, has some nice misdirection, and shows the true horror of this apocalypse. After that, we get a timeline of events chronicling everything from the very start, how most of the infected died off after 5 weeks, and how the Americans came in to save the day. And after 24 weeks, everything was deemed safe and the infection was over. We meet our 2 central American characters, Jeremy Renner's Doyle and Rose Byrne's Scarlett. They're welcoming civilians back to Britain, including a child named Andy who has 1 green eye and 1 brown eye. He and his sister head in on the train where the woman explains there's 15,000 people in the city, known as District 1. They meet up with their father, the same man from the opening scene, and as we follow them through the city, we see that there are security cameras also following them. Wonder if that means anything. They ask about their mom and what happened to her, and he tells the truth for a bit, but leaves out the fact that he completely abandoned her. So right away, this movie does something that I've never seen before, and that's the story of the end of an infection. We always see the start and then during, but there's hardly any stories out there that show us what happens after. Now, obviously, that's because if the infection is truly over, then there's no stakes or threats in a story, which essentially means there's no story at all. But that's not the case here. However, it is interesting to see the government handle something like this and how interesting it is that they even let people back into Britain so soon. Jeremy Renner's character Doyle starts off as this really obnoxious character who likes to spy on people with his sniper rifle and make kind of racist jokes.
Well, I've never seen you get so white. Come on!
And he complains about not having anything to shoot at, but then when he is given something to shoot at, it changes him. He goes through probably the most concrete character arc in the film, switches sides to help the civilians, and just generally goes from unlikable to likable. In contrast to the first film where Jim acknowledged when something was stupid,
Fucking obviously a shit idea!
the kids in this film are just stupid themselves. They're explicitly told not to go out of the city, so the first thing they do after they get settled into their new home is go into the city and try and find their old home. I get it, kids are stupid, I did stupid things as a kid too, but I don't think I'd be stupid enough to go into an infected city just to see my old house. And they literally don't give a single shit whatsoever. They aren't careful or cautious or anything, and you just know something bad is gonna happen. Scarlett was angry because she wasn't told about kids being let into the city, and everyone's like, oh no, it'll be fine, but this is the kind of shit that happens when you bring kids into an operation like this. But the boy ends up actually finding his mother, who didn't die in the opening scene, and now their dad's in a pretty tough spot. But something is off with the mother. She was clearly bitten and shows signs of aggression, but upon further testing, Scarlett finds out that she's not infected, but she's a carrier of the virus. She has the ability to infect people, but also might hold the key to finding a vaccine or even a cure. But General Idris Elba doesn't want to hear it and goes to execute her, all the while the husband sneaks in to make out with her and gets infected himself. Talk about karma. But he gets angry when she infects him and retaliates on her, and then gets out and starts spreading the virus to everybody else. This initiates Code Red in the city, and once again proves how dangerous this world and this virus is. Even though the infection was all cleared out, all it takes is one person in this city to get infected, and they're literally back to square one. This comes with the fallout of the city, and now we're essentially seeing a more controlled start to the zombie outbreak that we've seen dozens of times before. I also question who would even want to go back into Britain again, even in a controlled area. Complete and total chaos ensues when Dawn somehow gets into the controlled area, and this scene is truly horrifying. Just knowing how a single zombie can cause all of this chaos is terrifying, but the fact that there's very little light in the whole room because they shut the power off makes it feel so much more isolating. One thing I absolutely cannot stand is the continued use of shaky cam, and this was something that a lot of movies, especially horror movies in the 2000s, were guilty of. It's a way to make everything feel more chaotic, but it also means that you can get away with things a little bit easier because you don't spend so much time looking at them, or at least getting a good look at them. Essentially, shaky cam is a way to save money, so that's why they did it. Like I said, In a House in a Heartbeat is one of, if not the most iconic song from a zombie movie, so this movie makes sure to take full advantage of it, and it's used 3 times. including one very dark scene about halfway through the movie where the military goes from just being ordered to take out the infected to taking out everyone. This is where Jeremy Renner's character takes center stage in the film and becomes the action hero, saving the civilians instead of killing them. Actually, I still think he kills a few of them. What I like about this film is, even in 2007, we were all completely aware of the zombie tropes, so it doesn't take any time to build up the stuff that's about to happen. The city goes from completely fine to thoroughly razed in about 20 minutes. We all know the tropes, we've seen it all happen before, so it's written as if you already know these tropes and allows everything to move at a smooth pace. But this is also a really dark film thematically. Gone are the themes about living life to the fullest despite its circumstances. The theme of this film is, if something's wrong, get rid of it all, I guess, or it's something like that. There are no moments of levity or even breaths of fresh air after the events start happening. It just keeps on getting worse and worse, especially in the third act. This movie starts to feel edgy and dark just to try and make it seem dark and edgy, or maybe more realistic, but I don't think it does it very well. The overarching story in this film is about how special this child Andy is because of his natural genetic mutation and how that could lead to a cure. Scarlett and Doyle are just the generic protagonists that can help these kids survive, and then there's another random guy that comes with them when they escape. His presence is probably going to lead to some sort of chaos. Yep, that's exactly what it does. The only other notable character is Michael. He plays Flynn, the helicopter pilot. He and Jeremy Renner have a pretty good back and forth all movie, and Doyle ultimately has to sacrifice himself so that way the others have a chance at survival. Then there's this obnoxious shaky cam night vision sequence where Scarlett gets killed, and after the entire film, the zombie dad finally gets killed after biting his son. Except he's immune, so he's fine. They escape on Flynn's helicopter, and we cut forward another 28 days later to see the zombies arriving in France. This isn't a bad movie. It does feel like it could be any number of sequels to any number of zombie movies. I made a video about The Crazies, and this could easily be a sequel to that movie. There's no connection to the first movie whatsoever, and part of me likes that aspect of this movie, seeing a different perspective on the world, and I do think the idea of trying to return to civilization after the zombie apocalypse is very unique, and I liked how it was done. But the editing to this movie is so strange. It feels like they shot a different movie and then in post-production edited it with the shaky cam and then the music to make it seem like a sequel to 28 Days Later. And tonally, this is just an incredibly dark story that doesn't really make you want to watch it again. Overall, I'm going to give this movie like a 6 out of 10. Some great ideas and executed on some of them really well, but definitely not as enjoyable as the first one. So I was thinking about making this video for a very long time. I waited for 28 Days Later to come to some sort of streaming service, but it never did. And I'm not going to spend like $150 or whatever number is on screen right now to buy the Blu-ray, so unfortunately I had to set sail in order to find a copy. But with news of 28 years later and possibly more sequels on the horizon, I had to make this video. As of today's date, when I'm writing this, not when it's coming out, but today is April 29th, 2024 for me, the news we have is pretty limited, but Alex Garland and Danny Boyle are returning in some capacity. It's said that Alex Garland is going to write this film, and his plan is to kick off a new trilogy of 28 timeframe later movies. One report says that in this first film, Cillian Murphy will not be returning, but in the second one, he'll have a cameo, and in the third one, he'll have a major role. But Cillian himself said he would be open to returning to the franchise, so who knows at this point? Shooting for the film actually begins next month in May of 2024, and will star Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jodie Comer, and Lord Voldemort. A lot of this information got released rather quickly for how early they're starting to shoot, so maybe plans for this trilogy are further along than we thought, and that previous report of Cillian's role in the trilogy will end up being right. But this means that they'll be starting off with 28 years later, not months. So this begs the question of what happened at the end of Weeks and the zombies making it to Paris. Is Years gonna be similar to every other zombie apocalypse film where the whole world is just in disarray, there's no governments, just groups of survivors around the world? I liked the aspect of the world trying to return to normal in 28 weeks later, and there's evidence that a cure could come back into play. Maybe Aaron Taylor Johnson will be playing an older version of Andy in this film. And if this first film proves successful, I've got a ton of ideas for sequels. First off, you could do a prequel 28 months later, kind of filling in the gaps between weeks and years. Then you could do something like 28 seconds later. Maybe it's just a short film of some scientists having coffee in the break room when the chimps get loose. Then there's 28 fortnights later, which is a time period of 2 weeks for all you gamers out there. But hey, they could collab on it. Have the shirtless Jim Fortnite skin added to the game and have it premiere in the Fortnite movie theater, if that's a thing. Then we could do 28 decades later, and it's some sort of Blade Runner-esque movie. The characters have one throwaway line about how there used to be some sort of virus back in the 21st century. These are just off the top of my head, so Alex Garland, if you're listening, feel free to contact me and give me a job. Anyways, those are my thoughts on the 28 time frame later movies. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Special thanks to my channel members, you guys are the greatest. And if you're still around, I want to thank you all for getting me to 150K. YouTube has always been a dream job for me, and now you guys have allowed me to have that job. It's still crazy for me to think about, and saying thank you really doesn't feel sincere enough to communicate how grateful and thankful I am to each and every one of you. But truly, thank you for listening to me and watching these videos. You have no idea how much it means to me. So thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one.